Oh, thanks so much, everybody. Welcome to Build. I'm your host, Ricky Camilleri. For over a year, Bruce Springsteen has brought to Broadway an incredibly intimate and stripped-down look at his songs and stories. Our next guest has been tasked with taking the stage show and making it work on film. Thankfully, he completely succeeds. Just one night after the show concluded its Broadway run, Netflix released Thom Zimny's Springsteen on Broadway, and it is absolutely beautiful. Let's take a look.
This is what I've presented to you all these years as my long and noisy prayer, as my magic trick. And like all good magic tricks, it begins with a setup. When I was a young man and looking for a voice to tell my stories, well, I chose my father's voice. My father was my hero and my greatest foe. I was open to pain and crossed by the rain, and I walked on a crooked crutch. Mom was a different story altogether. Kindness, optimism, civility. She made me understand for the first time how good it feels. Feel pride in somebody that you love. One night, hanging out at Stone Pony, and this beautiful redhead shows up. She is a great songwriter. She's one of the loveliest voices I've ever heard. She is smart, tough, but fragile. Ladies and gentlemen, Patti Scialfa. Honey, I'm tougher than you. Name the things that'll give your life its meaning, its purpose, its fullness, its very reality. And this is what you build together. This is your life. I wanted to be able to celebrate and honor its beauty. I wanted to be able to be a critical voice when I thought that that's what the times called for. I wanted to know my story, your story. Where were we going together as a people? Us tramps like us, baby, we were born to run. More than anything else, I wanted to be able to tell that story well to you. Everybody has a love-hate relationship with their hometown. If you take me, I'm Mr. Born to Run. I currently live 10 minutes from my hometown.
Everybody, please welcome director of Springsteen on Broadway, Thom Zimny. Let's hear it.
How you doing?
Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for capturing this so beautifully.
Well, thank you so much. It's great to share it with everyone right now.
How many nights was this shot over, or is it one performance?
This was 2 nights that we had 9 cameras, and actually I started really working on it in rehearsals with Bruce, going to the very first rehearsals he had in New Jersey, and would sit there with a notepad and was watching him hone the show and put it together and edit it.
So what kind of notes are you taking at that point? Because how much are you actually getting invited to share ideas with the staging of the show so that it works on film, or are you mainly taking a backseat, letting them stage it, and then figuring out what you're going to do from there?
Well, I think it's a great question. The thing that I was doing was taking notes and really keeping out of any way of during the staging of it. But watching the details of Bruce, and what I mean by the details is how he's delivering a certain monologue or the tightening. One performance he had a longer speech, or one performance he played the song differently, the arrangements. So you follow along, and for the past year when the show was on Broadway, I would listen to the show and pay close attention to the details. And I started as an editor when I was in filmmaking, and I could see Bruce editing and putting together the details, and then would start to think, how could I film this? How could I get that stage feeling across? How can I get the theatrical feeling across? And I work with John Landau, Bruce's manager, for many years, and Bruce, and we've worked together now for 18 years. So in these rehearsals, I would talk about camera and camera movement and the power of the camera and what lenses that we could use.
Soft movement, too, which is so wonderful about the show. It's a very delicate, it's a delicate, soft show in a lot of ways, and the camera movement, I think, illuminates that by sort of by being that way as well.
It's when you're looking at the show, it's a very quiet atmosphere. There's something magical that goes on when you're in a theater and listening to him walk across the stage and the sound of the boots. and the sound of just that acoustic guitar. The last thing I wanted to do as a director was to get in the way of that magic. And what you could do is bring a dolly and a crane in and slowly float into a close-up and cross the stage line that you couldn't get, a point of view that you couldn't get sitting in a theatrical seat.
Well, I think that goes back to, and I'm not sure if you went and looked at them, but I was thinking of some of the greatest concert films while I was watching this. Stop Making Sense or Storefront Hitchcock, both Demi, but then also even The Last Waltz. While Last Waltz has all those music videos in there, the stage shows themselves are, in a lot of ways, no frills. They are just simply there to illuminate the beauty of what's happening. The same goes for Stop Making Sense and Storefront.
Those films are a huge influence in my life, and especially The Last Waltz, which I looked at tremendously when thinking about the Bruce's show on Broadway, because the language of the cameras is very, very classic cinema. And one of the things that I remember reading about The Last Waltz was the idea that everyone who was on that camera was an established cinematographer. So with Bruce on Broadway, I took the same approach, which I called the Last Waltz approach, which meant that there was not just a cameraman that I picked up that day. There was a cinematographer, Joe DeSalvo, a lead cinematographer, and then everyone else I had worked with in that capacity on other Bruce projects, but was at that level of...
So everybody wasn't just a technician, there was all
Exactly.
people with really great eyes.
Fantastic eyes, and they sat there and we talked about the film, the stage show, as if it was a film, that there'd be different tones, and really paid attention to the lighting. And all this came from working with Bruce, which is you want to step into the world of the Broadway show, try to convey it in a cinematic language that feels new, but is invisible. And what I mean by invisible is like you could feel the power of the close-up, but there's no swooping crane or something that takes you out and you go, cool shot.
Right. I don't even think there's like I could be wrong, and maybe I don't remember, but like a close-up on his hands playing the piano that often. It's really focused on the face, and it's really focused on him on the stage, what it looks like to see him on this stage, and somehow without ever feeling flat, because usually that can feel quite flat.
Well, these are great questions, because they were things that I was obsessed with. How do I get across the depth of field of that stage? When Bruce is, a lot of times when someone's playing the piano, you get a side profile and everything is flat, and then just close up of the hands. And I knew I didn't want to do any inserts. And that's what inserts on the guitar or inserts just of hands. And occasionally I'll go there to show the beauty of the music, but I really worked on trying to get the landscape of that stage. And one of the things was to show Bruce in close-up in a way that he was sitting across, the camera would go right across the piano. So you could start in profile and wrap around. So all these things were things I discussed with both John Landau and Bruce, and would sit there and look at the power of his close-up and realize you didn't need very much more. You just needed to get out of the way of the beauty of the show.
There's a testament to so much about with this, in the sense of the simplicity of what you're doing as a director, but at the same time, that simplicity is a lot of decisions that sort of, it's kind of it's deceptive. Someone could watch it who's not really in tune with everything that you're doing and be like, oh, he's just filming this show. And it's like, no, he's actually doing a lot. And the same thing goes for what Bruce is doing. It is deceptively simple in a lot of ways, because he is just seemingly talking about himself and playing these stripped down versions of his songs. But it's really hard to have crafted the story that he has, this sort of meta story about himself, while at the same time still operates as an emotional story about himself.
In watching the show so many times and then filming it, I could really break down a lot of the details of how he would deliver a single line, the pauses or the rhythm, and I don't know how to put it into exact words, but he's always responding from night one to night two. When I was filming, there's slight rhythmic changes. He's always responding to the stage, the environment, and the people around him. So with that in mind, it's just. You tried to film, when working with Bruce, you try to film it in the same zone, which is you want it to be felt, but you don't want it to be noticed. And I felt like the stage show had such a beautiful stripped down set, beautiful lighting, and very bare stage. And, who else could carry an audience for 2.5 hours with a guitar and a microphone?
That is some of the things that I was wondering while I was watching. I don't think anybody else could do this. I don't think anybody else would have me... I would be holding on to their pauses and their words like this. It's it's a real testament to his charisma.
Yeah, and I agree. The power of just listening to him comes across in the stage show, but also as a filmmaker, I never had the desire to, cut away. Bruce talks about his childhood. I didn't want to show photos. I didn't want to show archival footage. I didn't want to show him even backstage. I wanted the film to start right away in a close-up, and you had to listen. And that's how the theater felt to me. It's like lights got low, he started, and then you went on this journey. And I wanted the film to reflect that. So I started right away in editing with that approach.
Just keep it on the stage and stay there.
Yeah, because we all grew up with the language of concert films and the language of VH1 and that kind of busyness that happens. And with
This is not that.
it's not that. But sometimes what you'll see within the language of comedy shows or other multi-camera events, there's a lot of editing that goes on, and you kind of figure out exactly the point of view and the camera's point of views. And with these songs, I looked at each one of them as a little mini movie, that they should have a different tone. And I would storyboard certain points that had to be shot at a certain time from a certain angle, certain details. And that came from studying the show.
Well, some of them also have a literal story that goes along with them. Each of them are either introduced or followed by a story that is, if not the story of that song, at least reflective of what that song means to him and why he wrote that song.
I mean, the biggest surprise for me was the first night of filming, he changed the set list and he included a song, Long Time Coming. And 5 minutes before, he had added it. And it turned out to be one of the most powerful things that we filmed. And it was a song that he talked about his father and it had this very emotional moment on stage. The one thing I've learned from both John and Bruce is to really be in this space of being prepared, but being ready for exactly that kind of thing. And I've watched him do that with the E Street Band, where he throws out a song in the middle of the concert that's not on the set list, and everyone has to be ready, and he goes, he counts off. So in a weird way, as a film director,
You think he was testing you?
I don't think he was testing me, but I think that's his process, which is he felt it in the moment. It didn't matter that we talked about doing just the set. And it was great because it shook it up the set list, and we also captured something that's one of my favorite moments in the film.
Is the length of the film, has anything been cut? Have you cut a song here or a story here, or is that essentially the show?
The film reflects the show. Right. And it has the duration and the pauses and the rhythm and the musicality of his voice. And there's the only thing, the little tightening up between guitar changes and things like that. But outside of that, it's the show.
So can I ask you had 9 cameras, you said, going, or 19?
9.
9, yeah. That 19 cinematographers would be
That'd be a
heavy budget there. You have 9 cameras going, and essentially because you are cutting, in length the actual chronology of just the show itself, is your job for the most part as the editor then and director to just sort of find the camera shot, the cameras that are complementing what's going on stage the most? And did you have an idea going into it at each point which cameras were probably going to be doing that?
Well, I did storyboard certain moments, so I knew that the camera on the side of the stage was going to get a certain guitar riff on a certain song. Or I knew that I wanted my crane way back to be creeping in on a certain line. So I would be talking to... Live directing it. So I'd be talking to the cameraman and be like, cameras... And it wasn't the kind of NFL multi-camera screaming, yelling, camera 4, camera... It was a quiet, peaceful, meditative... You stayed in the space of the Broadway performance. So with that in mind...
You actually weren't cutting for live. You're
just
sort of asking them to get different...
And trying to keep up with Bruce, really. Where if he's walking across the stage and knowing which camera could represent that in the moment. And then you go back into the edit room and it becomes something completely different. And that's where you start to work with the narrative.
Now I have to ask, the show ended on Broadway and then this went up on Netflix. Has he seen it?
Bruce is involved with the editing and all the filmmaking process. I shot tests. Bruce was involved with that. If I was talking about cameras, I was talking about lenses, I was talking about camera position, John Landau and Bruce are right there. So It's not something like the film director arrives and then he sees it a couple of years from now after it being on Netflix.
You didn't show up and go, final cut. I have final cut here,
Exactly.
Bruce.
No, it's nothing like that, but it's the beauty of the collaboration is that they give me a trust, and with it, we all try to find a new way of telling the story. And with Broadway, it presented a lot of challenges, and one of them again was that intimacy, and also how to work with camera differently, and what I mean by that is changing the shot size and getting the impact of his lines and in medium, wide, and close up.
Were your camera tests that you did at the Broadway show, and then you would show him the tests, or were they during rehearsals?
Both. I would do rehearsals, and I would also film some of the shows, and then look at how the lights were being read. Because when you shoot something with a camera, the lights can change. So there was a lot of adjusting that I had to do with the lights, and
Actual adjusting of the lights.
yeah, bringing them down percentages so that they read on the camera a way that felt like the stage show. So that's the amount of detail that we go through, and also remove seats and put up a dolly track and all that. So
I take it he's generally pretty happy with the way that it.
he's thrilled, and I saw him Saturday night, and he's just really enjoyed making this film together. And I saw John Landau, and the whole thing was a great dream project for me.
You've worked with them before, though, right?
Yes, I've been working with them for 18 years.
How did that start?
I was asked to cut a concert for Live in New York in 2000, and it was a concert that was for HBO, and it took place at Madison Square Garden. I had seen the show, and 2 days later, I got a call to work a week on this Bruce Springsteen project, and then it ended up being about 8 months. Wow. And I got to meet Bruce and work with him, and we kind of carried on. And then one day I was working on a documentary, and before I knew it, I started directing without much discussion. So I made the transition from editor to director.
For him, a documentary for him.
Yeah.
Wow.
So my education in film is, I was working in documentaries and other projects as an editor, and transitioned into being a director. But this space, actually, this studio, is where I bought all Bruce's records, right here in Tower. This used to be the old Tower. So this is
before you started working with him, when you bought all of his records.
It was right where we're sitting now. So this is.
What was it like when he tapped you to start directing, or was it John that tapped you?
It was both John and Bruce, and it was the kind of thing that it wasn't a big discussion. It was sort of like you're doing it and take the ball and run. And it was a documentary on Born to Run. Wow. And I've really had a great opportunity to do films, a short film with him, and music videos, and other documentaries. And this is the first long form concert film for me. So.
So much of, and this isn't necessarily, I think, the best question for you because you didn't write the show, but you've spent so much time with it, and Bruce isn't here, so I have to ask you. Is this question of authenticity, and it's a lot of what he's talking about. When am I being authentic? How do you know I am authentic? I wrote these songs, but I am actually this person. What part of me is real? But then at the same time, it shifts and becomes a very emotional story about his father, which could still lend itself to be how much of that is the Bruce Springsteen performer on the stage still telling that story, and how much of that is the real Bruce Springsteen. And I'm wondering, obviously there's truth to all of it, but I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that sort of meta storytelling idea that he has, this magic trick.
Well, the magic trick is a great thing to witness, and I embrace it because I recognize that it's that power that he has both in the studio and the live performances, which is an examination of his audience and the world around him and his own history. And I try to get that through the documentaries. I've interviewed him many times, and I've talked to him many times, and the beauty of that magic trick with the Broadway show especially is those quiet moments of reflection, because I truly see that they are an honest moment of confession, and I think the camera reads that, and I think that's the beauty of filming Bruce, is that it doesn't matter if he has done the show 256 times. When he's with an audience, you sense that he's present. And that, to me, is the magic trick, and that is the beauty of trying to capture his Broadway show, because so much was revealed in the quiet, and then also in the spaces of the rhythm of his voice, the eyes. You know, it all comes down to that.
I took it as the magic trick is knowing how to tell a story, because he says the story it begins with a setup, like all great magic tricks. And so much of what he's done over the course of career is tell great stories, and so many of them have been attributed to him as if they were solely about him. But as he says in this, I've never worked in a factory. You know, I live 10 minutes from my house, and I think that's so fascinating for him to reveal all that at the top, and then become once again sincere and authentic about his family later on in the middle of it.
Well, that's, you know, I looked at the script very closely, and I came into directing as an editor. I worked on things like The Wire, and the content of learning how to deal with dialogue and look at it very closely. In the
Show?
Yeah, for 3 seasons.
Great show.
Thank you.
Maybe
And
the best.
but I learned a lot in the cutting room, and I looked at Bruce's dialogue with that same sense, where you know, there's all these different points that are happening that the viewer he comes out and declares, I never worked a day in my life. And they're humorous moments. And you look at, but what's going on in the bigger picture of that whole show? So some of those choices I would look at and say, oh, this has to play in a wide. Right. His physical body is doing this gesture that you need to see. And then there's other quieter moments that I thought we can stay in a medium and slowly creep in for a close-up. So
gauging whether or not it's going to play for laughs or whether or not this
Exactly.
bit is going to play for a sincere moment.
Exactly. And in the editing, looking at the words, looking at how he delivered it, and then also looking what the gods have thrown you in the moment. That's the cutting room. And I sit with John and Bruce, and they'll drop in the edit room, and we'll play some things. And it's amazing from shot to shot how something will play differently. A joke can get totally lost with the wrong angle or the wrong tempo cut. And that's the exciting part of making this, because I wanted it to feel like I was in the theater. I had enough experiences watching the show that I knew if I lost that magic, and hopefully it came across.
Oh, of course. How long were you editing it for?
It's a good question. It's a bit of a blur. There was months and months. I shot it this summer, and just went into the cutting room, and it was night and day. So
Started hacking away and seeing what you got. Yeah.
And it's the kind of thing, as a director, all Bruce's material I love to cut, because I feel very close to it, and I couldn't really turn it over and collaborate with another editor that way. So it was the kind of I just feel so familiar with it that it's a big part of the connection I have with making these films, is getting it in the cutting room. When you arrive in the cutting room, it's a different thing, you know. There's new surprises to find, and then the camera sometimes captures something that's not exactly how you remember it.
But oftentimes editors say that, or filmmakers say they don't want to be editing their own material because they don't want to be as close to it, as you said, because you can't be objective. You get too close to things that maybe need to get cut.
I think I have that great balance with both John Landau and Bruce, where I can say, you know, watching a cut, and we'll get into a conversation about an aspect of it and debate. So that helps me as a director and editor, because I have this other voice, even though they're able to stay back and look at it from a point of view as a viewer. Right. But I do work as a director on other films, and I collaborate with editors, and it's a tremendous plus to have that other point of view. But with something like this, I was sort of living it and dreaming it for about a year. I saw the show so many times. And
how many times would you say you've seen the show?
I've
not including in the editing room.
I mean, honestly, I lost count how many times I saw it on Broadway, and then when I think about the audio that I looked at, it was pretty intense.
Let's get some questions from our audience. Who has a question? Hi, walking up. Hey there.
Hey.
Hi.
How are you?
Good.
Good. I recently read an interview you had did speaking on the Elvis Presley project, and you were saying like the music will always be first, as I'm sure it's the same intent for Bruce Springsteen. So I was wondering, why do you feel like this way of capturing music is so important to your audience?
I think it's a great question. I love that question because with the Elvis Presley story, a lot of salacious things got in the way of that narrative. Yeah. So culturally, you know, artists from Memphis and his history and his love of gospel, R&B, gets completely lost in this story that Elvis just went to Sun Records and got lucky.
Yeah.
So I love to look at the details in documentaries that are lost and left behind, and bring those in the forefront. With Bruce, it's the same thing where I really I can't imagine getting in the way of the storytelling or the music. So I just want to be in sync with him. And that means telling his story and also for the Broadway show, conveying the feeling, which is an abstract thing. It's kind of hard to explain, but I wanted that quiet. I wanted that pacing. I didn't want to suddenly make a new thing out of it. I wanted to convey more, but it's my role is to be in sync with him.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Next question.
Over here.
Hi.
Hi. Bruce has always demonstrated a lot of familiarity with pop culture, from everything from talking about seeing Elvis for the first time in 1956, whatever. And a couple of times in the book, he talks about not being a fan of democracy when it comes to his music. And the E Street Band. And he talks about the time that he was very harsh with Jake Clemens when he came into the band. So simply put, what's it like collaborating with the boss?
I think it's a great question, again, because it presents a side of the journey, which is to collaborate with Bruce, you want to arrive to the set prepared. But the biggest thing he taught me was to be ready for anything. And everyone in the band operates that way, and everyone on the touring side and everyone who's around him. So working for Bruce is an exciting adventure, but it's not something that, with the Broadway show especially, I did my homework for a solid year before I got the chance to be told that I would be filming it. And that's how I approached the work. I think we have a tremendous amount of discussions. I think it's each one of the films we try something new, and we work off of each other's energy. But there's never a moment of not imagining that we're gonna go through a journey. If it's a music video, we're gonna explore using certain cameras or using certain light or getting certain themes across.
Can he give up that control and rely upon your expertise with that?
I've never seen it as control in the sense of
Collaboration.
it's a collaboration, and that collaboration, if you're going to be in that space with him, you have to be at that top form and be ready. And I remember there was moments in the shooting that just happened that there's no way I could have prepared for it, but I needed to believe in the power of the film gods throwing me this moment and get it and chase it. So I've watched him do that with the band in the studio. I've taken my cues from both John Landau and Bruce for many, many years. So I approach these things in that zone, which is do all your homework and then look for the mistake that's beautiful.
One more.
Hi.
Hi.
So we actually have a question from online from Ben on Twitter. And the question is, we are seeing more and more of the blending of live performance theater and film, such as Peter Pan and Grease Live and other shows that have gone to Netflix, and now Springsteen. My question is, do you like the direction of where theater is headed, and what do you see for this new sort of genre?
I love the idea of working with camera and working with visually presenting these theatrical moments in this way that conveys the theater experience, especially with surround sound and the level that you can shoot the shows now, where you lose that feeling of it being very flat. And with the Bruce show especially, we were able to capture the way that theater sounded and it sounded like when Bruce was off mic and on mic. So all those details, I think, give a great opportunity to shoot something in a theater in an interesting way. I think it's an exciting time.
Did you find that because of the way that the show was lit and the way that he's moving around the stage, that you had the chance, and we referenced The Last Waltz earlier, and The Last Waltz is this great take away the documentary aspect where he's actually interviewing them, but it's this mixture of music video and live performance. Did you kind of feel like you were getting a mixture of that on the stage as well, where it's not just a live performance, it's the lighting is consistently changing. He's walking around and stories are sort of being told in a cinematic way.
Well, watching the show from the seat and also watching Bruce design the lighting with the lighting designer and work on tones, I could see that there was drama in every one of the monologues, and there was drama in the lighting scheme and the set design, and each one of the songs had its own emotional tone. So again, I would take notes and imagine, oh, this is going to play out in the wide the best. Let's get a camera up in the balcony for the song The Rising to really show how stark it is. And tried to respond to the idea that I was going to have these dialogue moments and musical moments, so that sometimes with a dialogue there was no editing. It would be a single camera on him for a long time, and then when the music kicked in, you change the palette, and all of a sudden you start to edit and give different perspectives. But sometimes when it was just having a dialogue piece, it was very limited in the cutting.
What
so you
would,
could listen.
What's your favorite sequence in the movie?
Long Time Coming, which was the song that he threw at me last second, because it's a highly emotional moment, and his face reads the sadness in telling the story, and there's a beauty that comes across that reminds me of Bruce, the performer, connected to his audience and to his narrative that he's sharing, and also the beautiful songwriting, and that to me was a major moment, and my favorite moment of directing Bruce.
Of all time?
Yeah, because
Wow.
it just was. It's a powerful song that I love, and also it was something that just happened, and I was able to slowly bring the camera closer and closer to him to reveal that his eyes had tears, and it's a highly emotional scene, and that's what you look for.
Well, Thom, it's an incredible film. It's a beautiful
Thank you so much.
document of a cultural moment that I think a lot of people are never going to forget.
Well,
At least
thank you.
everybody that got to see it live, and hopefully everybody that sees the film as well.
Yeah, you sit at home and play it loud. So that's
It's on Netflix right now. It's called Springsteen on Broadway. Everybody give Thom a big round of applause. Let's hear it.